in the 1830s. One of the darkest chapters in American history unfolded, tragedy known as the Trail of Tears. The United States government, under the Indian Removal Act of 1830, forced Native American tribes, including the Cherokee Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole, to leave their ancestral lands in the Southeast. These lands had been their homes for centuries, rich with culture, traditions, and memories. Imagine a place where your family has lived for generations. A land that holds the stories of your ancestors, the sacred sites of your spiritual life, and the very soil from which you draw your sustenance. Now, imagine being told you must leave it all behind. This wasn't just a suggestion. It was an order backed by the full force of the U.S. military. This was the grim reality for tens of thousands of Native Americans. The policy of Indian removal was driven by a relentless hunger for land. As the cotton industry boomed in the South, white settlers and land speculators coveted the fertile territories occupied by the 5 civilized tribes, a name given to these nations because they had adopted many aspects of American culture, including centralized governments, written constitutions, literacy, and even plantation-style farming. The Cherokee, for example, had their own written language, created by the brilliant scholar Sequoyah, and a newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix *. They had built schools, churches, and prosperous farms. They were, by many standards, model neighbors. But their success and assimilation did not protect them. Instead, it may have made their lands even more desirable. Political pressure mounted, and President Andrew Jackson, a longtime advocate of Indian removal, made it a cornerstone of his administration. He framed the policy as a benevolent act, arguing that removing the tribes to the west, to what was then called Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma, was necessary for their own survival, protecting them from the corrupting influence of white society. He claimed it would allow them to live according to their own customs, free from state interference. The reality, of course, was far from this paternalistic fantasy. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 was passed by a narrow, contentious vote in Congress. It granted the president the authority to negotiate treaties to exchange Native American lands in the East for lands west of the Mississippi River. While the act theoretically made the removal voluntary, the pressure applied was immense. State governments began to assert jurisdiction over tribal lands, nullifying their laws and making life impossible for native residents. Harassment, theft, and violence became commonplace, with little to no legal recourse for the victims. The Choctaw were the first to be removed, beginning in 1831. Their leaders, seeing the inevitable, signed a treaty under extreme duress. The removal was a disaster. It was poorly organized, underfunded, and took place during a harsh winter. People were forced to walk hundreds of miles with inadequate food, shelter, and clothing. Cholera broke out, and the journey became a trail of death. A Choctaw leader, looking back at the suffering grimly, described it as a trail of tears and death. The name stuck, a haunting testament to the experience. Next came the Seminole in Florida, who fiercely resisted. This led to the Second Seminole War, a brutal, costly conflict that lasted for years. Many Seminoles, led by figures like Osceola, fought a guerrilla war from the swamps of the Everglades. Although thousands were eventually captured and forcibly removed, a small number managed to evade the army and remain in Florida, where their descendants live to this day. The Creek Nation also faced a brutal removal in 1836 after being incited into a conflict. They were rounded up as prisoners of war, shackled in chains, and marched west, leaving a trail of suffering behind them. The Chickasaw, foreseeing the inevitable, managed to negotiate a better financial settlement for their lands, but they too suffered terribly from disease and hardship on their journey. But perhaps the most well-known and heart-wrenching story is that of the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee had exhausted every peaceful and legal avenue to protect their sovereignty. They had a written constitution and a government modeled on that of the United States. They took their case all the way to the Supreme Court, and in the 1832 case Worcester v. Georgia they won. Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that the state of Georgia had no authority within Cherokee territory, affirming the tribe's status as a distinct political community. It was a landmark legal victory that should have protected them. But President Andrew Jackson famously defied the court's decision. He is reported to have said, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it." The federal government refused to uphold the ruling, leaving the Cherokee vulnerable and betrayed by the very legal system they had put their faith in. With their legal options exhausted, the Cherokee Nation became deeply divided. A small, unauthorized faction known as the Treaty Party believed that further resistance was futile. Led by Elias Boudinot and Major Ridge, they went against the wishes of the vast majority of the Cherokee people and their elected leader, Principal Chief John Ross. In 1835, they signed the Treaty of New Echota, ceding all Cherokee lands east of the Mississippi for $5 million and new lands in the west. Chief Ross and the Cherokee National Council argued the treaty was fraudulent, signed by individuals with no authority. Over 15,000 Cherokees signed a petition protesting it, but the U.S. Senate ratified it by a single vote. The fate of the Cherokee Nation was sealed. They were given 2 years to voluntarily move. Most refused, clinging to their homes and believing justice would prevail. But when the deadline arrived in the spring of 1838, President Martin Van Buren, Jackson's successor, ordered the army to enforce the treaty. General Winfield Scott arrived with 7,000 soldiers. What followed was a campaign of terror. Families were forced from their homes at gunpoint. They were given no time to gather their possessions. They were herded into makeshift stockades concentration camps with deplorable conditions. Over the hot summer months, disease ran rampant through these crowded, unsanitary prisons. Hundreds, if not thousands, died before the journey even began. An eyewitness from Georgia later wrote, "I saw the helpless Cherokees arrested and dragged from their homes and driven at the bayonet point into the stockades, and in the chill of a drizzling rain on an October morning, I saw them loaded like cattle into wagons and started toward the west." Finally, in the fall and winter of 1838, the forced march began in earnest. Divided into detachments, some traveled by river, but most walked the nearly 1,000-mile journey overland. They trudged through brutal winter conditions, ice, snow, and freezing rain with little more than the clothes on their backs. Starvation, exposure, and disease were constant companions. The route was littered with the graves of the dead. It is estimated that of the roughly 16,000 Cherokees who were removed, over 4,000 perished either in the internment camps or along this brutal path they called Nunadal Isuni, the trail where they cried. Imagine the despair. Parents were forced to bury their children on the side of a frozen road, with no time to mourn properly before being forced to move on. Elders, the keepers of tradition and wisdom, succumbed to the harsh conditions. The psychological trauma was as devastating as the physical suffering. It was a journey that stripped people of their homes, their dignity, and for many, their lives. When the survivors finally arrived in Indian Territory, they were broken, impoverished, and grieving. They faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives and their nation in a strange new land. The internal divisions caused by the fraudulent treaty erupted into violence, leading to the assassination of the treaty party leaders who had signed it away. The scars of this trauma would run deep, affecting generations to come. The Trail of Tears is more than just a single event. It is a symbol of the profound injustice inflicted upon Native American peoples throughout American history. It was a policy of ethnic cleansing, driven by greed and justified by racism. It demonstrates a catastrophic failure of American ideals, where the rule of law was abandoned and human rights were systematically violated by the government sworn to protect them. Today, the 5 tribes are vibrant, sovereign nations in Oklahoma. They have rebuilt their societies, preserved their languages and cultures, and stand as a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. But they have never forgotten. The Trail of Tears is a sacred memory, a story that must be told and retold, not just to honor the victims, but to serve as a permanent reminder of the consequences of intolerance and injustice. It's a vital part of American history that we all have a responsibility to understand and acknowledge. Thank you so much for watching. Learning about these difficult parts of our shared past is crucial. If you found this video informative, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. See you next time.